Shaping is going to be a really important concept for us. It is one of the key elements of positive reinforcement training. You're going to find it really useful in the exercises that we do in this class, and I hope that you can see how shaping could apply to other activities that you might do with your horse in the future. In its simplest form, shaping is a process of breaking down a behavior into a series of steps or a series of smaller behaviors in order to teach that new behavior to your learner. So you're going to start by rewarding the slightest try that comes anywhere close to your goal behavior. It's probably not going to be anything that looks like your goal behavior, but it might look like a piece of the goal behavior. And then you're going to reward what we call successive approximations. So these are behaviors that get closer and closer to your goal behavior until that end criteria is reached. So there is a bit of an art to deciding how big your successive approximations should be, and that's just going to vary depending on which horse you're working with. It's going to depend on your skills as a trainer. It's going to depend maybe on the day, the weather, what your horse did in the pasture, and how fresh their mind is before you came there to work with them today. So there's no set recipe for how to shape any behavior and how to create successive approximations. But if you understand the overarching concept, you can adapt to whatever situation you are confronted with. And you'll see my last little bullet point here. When in doubt, slice it thinner. So by that I mean, if you're having trouble, just break it down into smaller steps and build it back up from there. Let's go through some example shaping plans here to try to make this concept a little more real world and help it make a little more sense. So for our first goal behavior, we're going to pick parking on a mat. So I picked behavior criteria of 2 front feet standing square and completely on the mat. So no feet hanging halfway off and no haphazard stance. We wanted a square stance. So a possible shaping progression, if the horse hasn't stood on a mat before, you might start with rewarding sniffing the mat. And then you might reward a next criteria of pawing the mat. And then you might click for 1 foot partially on the mat. So maybe just the toe is over the edge. And then you would up your criteria to the foot being completely on the mat. And then 2 feet on the mat, but maybe they're not square. And then finally, you would get 2 feet on the mat and square. We'll go over here and we're going to talk haltering. And this is one possible scenario. In the catching a hard to catch horse course, we will go through a bunch of different possible shaping progressions because there are so many different ways you can do this. But here's one just to get your wheels spinning. In this example, I picked some fairly general criteria of horse sticks his nose in the halter and horse keeps his head low as the halter slides over his ears and then is either buckled or tied. So I think you guys probably have noticed that those are really broad, and there are all kinds of ways we could be more specific. Think on that and see what kind of criteria you might want to incorporate into haltering with your horse. But our possible shaping progression for that, again, these are going to be kind of big chunks. We might start with sniffing the halter, then sticking the nose in the halter, then maybe we have the horse stick his nose in the halter and we move that crown piece up towards his ears, but not quite all the way over, and we click if the horse stays still for that process. Then we would add sliding the crown piece over the ears, and again, click if he stays still, and then add buckling the throat latch there at the end. Those are quite broad chunks, so each of those could be broken down into several different smaller criteria. So just take a moment and kind of brainstorm how you might break some of those down into even smaller steps, because that kind of thought process, how can we make it easier? How can we make it a smaller step? How can I help my horse be more successful? If you can start thinking thinking in those terms, you're gonna move much more smoothly when we start getting into these exercises. This last slide is just kind of a summary slide, but I just want to remind you guys that there is no one-size-fits-all shaping plan. So each exercise that we're going to do in this course is going to be a piece of the big picture shaping plan. So I will give you the basic outlines and suggestions for common modifications, common ways to shape individual exercises. But if you're having trouble, and you can find a way to make your successive approximations smaller, that's usually the key to success. And essentially, I'm trying to give you the tools so that you can individualize this to whatever your situation is, because there's just no possible way for me to anticipate any possible scenario that you guys might find yourselves in, because there's just so much that could be going on. So when in doubt, slice it thinner. That's shaping.